All right. I wonder if you guys can hear me. I've got the live stream booting up. Just waiting for it to show up on YouTube. All right. See, we got a few people already in here hanging out. So it might be a packed house today. We got Jack, Luke, Chantel. Oh yeah, a lot of people here. Cool. So we're going to be going over a few different things here for week 4. Basically, going to be covering some different things with Nuke. We're going to be doing a little bit of very, very simple post processing. It's for you guys. It's actually going to be the first time you've used Nuke, so that's going to be kind of interesting. Um, and most of you probably already have your Nuke stuff working. The license thing with Nuke is a little tricky. If you are experiencing any license issues, we're going to want to look into getting that resolved. I think you can still use the non-commercial, even if you're having a license problem, but we'll figure that out. But hopefully everyone's good with Nuke. All right, so let's jump in here. First off, can you guys all hear me? Hopefully you can hear me. Let's just make sure that works. It looks like it should be working. Sweet. Okay, good. We're going to keep going. So what we're going to do is just bring this in here. And down here in week 4, I just went through all the character submissions. I've been really pretty pleased with how 4.1 turned out. It's a really good job with all that. So just like the previous weeks, we got the live session, which is really just like a completion for you guys, just participating in this, absorbing the content, watching the recording if you want the next day or over the weekend. This one's a little more critical than the other ones. This one, because normally, like with your last activity, like there's still a bunch of videos that go with it. There's not many videos that are in 4.3. So really, all the information you need to complete your 4.3 assignment is going to be in this live session. Now, I do have some dive deeper down here. Before I kind of changed the class a little bit, and previously I didn't have this activity as a live session. It used to be its own separate assignment, but I've just rearranged a few things, so it's actually kind of worked out for you guys because I thankfully do have my playlist where I break down the activity in like individual videos. So if you guys feel like you want to have a little more information on Nuke, where I'm a little more detailed explaining how different things work, I would definitely encourage you to go to the dive deeper and just check out these two guys right here. That'll definitely help you out. Mainly the first one, post-processing with lights. That's the big guy. But let's get in here and do this. So the main goal, let me back up. I'm going to go into 4.3 so you can see roughly what we're doing here. We are going to be doing this stuff. Wait, where is it? Actually, where is... Oh, wait a second. I may have not updated this properly. Uh-oh, I gotta fix this. Wait a second. Environment bonus. Oh, shoot, that's not good. I have the wrong documentation up here. I'm gonna have to fix this because I actually have the wrong documentation in 4.3. Discussion. Yeah, I'm gonna show you what you're gonna do. I'm gonna have to fix this. This is actually from the previous version of the class, and I thought I had it updated, but I didn't. So that's going to look good in the recording. What you're supposed to be doing is you're going to be taking the bonus render from the last assignment with the lights. We're going to bring it into Nuke. We're going to do some very, very basic color correction to it, just changing the colors of the lights. We're going to have you guys build your first comp with Nuke just to get familiar with node editing, how the software works. And all you're really doing is exporting out the modified version of the render and then uploading that to the forum, and you're going to be recording a video about this. And I'm very surprised I don't have that fixed, but that's my bad. Yep, I did everything except fix that documentation. So I'll get this fixed after our lecture and make sure that's good for you guys before we get to tomorrow. So we are going to wing it a little bit. That's always going to be fun. All right. What I'm going to do is we're inside of Maya. I'm just going to very quickly set my project to my character project. Okay, so I've got the root folder selected, set, scenes, and let's see, where's the one I want? I think it's this one. This should be it. What you want to do is just use your most recent version of your character file, probably called character lighting. It's the one you guys just completed for the submission last night. So one thing I will point out, by the way, that I was really happy with is going through everybody's assignments. I noticed a lot of you guys were like naming your lights. Everybody was using display layers. A lot of you guys were using color coding, which is awesome. And I know it seems like it's not that big of a deal, but I can't tell you how many times before teaching at another school where we'd have issues where stuff wasn't named properly, things were never organized. So you guys are starting off your first month in Maya and you're already thinking about organization, naming things properly. Just please keep doing that. If you get in the habit of just naming and organizing your stuff for every class, this is going to pay off so much by the time you get to your portfolio stuff. Now I have a couple different images I could use for this one. I know a few of you have actually done a few different versions of the bonus render, so you might have some options. You could even combine a couple of them together if you wanted to. So for my 4.1, these are the 4 bonus images I did. I got this one. This is a checker setup. We got our loop lighting with a backlight and a kind of an accent rim. I also have a badger light setup, very similar to a split light with a rim light coming from behind the character. And we got this guy. So it doesn't really matter which bonus render you guys want to use. If you have multiple ones, you can kind of combine a couple together. The only important thing is if you guys happen to have multiple bonus images and you want to try combining different bonus lights together, the key thing here is you need to make sure that when you render this stuff, make sure that your renders are all from the same camera. Like I can't take the lights from this camera angle and combine it with this one right here. They need to be the same camera if you guys are going to mess around with stuff like that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep mine kind of simple, and I might do this one because this one does have 3 different lights, and I think it'll be enough just to kind of get the point across. So this is bonus 3 for me. So I think that would be, I think it's this guy. Yep. Let me actually see if I have, that's my badger. Oh, that's checker, loop, top. I want to see if I can combine these two. Let me see what this looks like. This might look really weird. I have 2 of my different setups turned on at once because I kind of want to see what this is doing. And why am I not seeing my background? There we go. All right. I'm just going to do a quick render here. And I want to see, oh, that's a party. Okay, I'm going to actually probably do this. What I've done is I got a couple different lights combined together. I got the top one, top and under light, and I've got this one, all in the same image. And we're just going to throw them together, and I can kind of map some different things. There we go. Sorry about that. I think my computer kind of freaked out there for a minute, so you might see a slight lag. So to do this properly in Nuke, what we want to do is show you guys how we can render out different lights separately and then add them together with post-processing. So we're breaking up the lights per light. Yeah, it should pop back. There we go. So to render these separately, we are just going to simply hide our lights and then do this one at a time. So I'm going to start with the top and under. We're just going to turn that on. Let's actually get all these on actually all at once. And let's see, I got to find these in my outliner too. So that is, oh good, they're all grouped together. So these are my guys I'm concerned about. So what I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier for me is I'm going to take all these lights and do Control G just to put them in a group, just so I can kind of separate them from the other ones so I remember exactly which ones I'm working with. So we're going to start with taking 4 of the lights, and actually let's just render this as it is right now. And I know typically when you guys do your final renders, I've been having you guys crank the settings up. You've been doing your higher light samples, higher indirect samples. You're boosting max samples up a little bit. For today, for the sake of time, I am not going to be doing high quality renders, and I'm sure you all know why. We're trying to get out of here at a decent time, and I think it's very boring for you guys to watch me render like 5 or 6 images back to back, and it's like watching paint dry. So mine are going to be low quality, but it's the same process. You guys would just hopefully be waiting a little longer to let your renders finish. So if I click in this viewer, and I'm going to hit the big blue R on the shelf, so we're initiating our full render. Got the image tools launching up, and currently I have both light setups on at the same time. So we're just getting a wonderful rainbow of colors from all sorts of different angles. It is beautiful. Now I'm going to kill the render and cancel it. This is what it currently looks like with everything turned on. But if I were to save this out of Maya, there's not really a whole lot I can do with this because it's one singular image. What we want to do is break this up into multiple images. So I want to get an image of just this light coming from the top, the underside. I want to get the red and kind of the teal lights separately, the white light in the background. I want to break them up all into different images because as long as they're saved as independent images, I can do a lot of other color modifications to them without affecting the whole image. So we want to control things per light. That's really the kind of the fun goal here with this thing. So how do I do that? Well, it's really pretty easy. Since I got these grouped together, what we're going to do is just select 4 of the lights that we don't want. We're going to hit H, and we're just going to simply hide the light. So remember, hide is our little hotkey here. It says Control H, and unhide is, I think, like Shift H. If you just use H by itself, that will hide and unhide stuff pretty easily. So make sure you have one light visible, and then in the image tool with one light visible, we're going to make sure we're in the right viewer. Just bring that in a little bit. And I'm going to hit R. So remember, R, if you're in the image tool, is your render again shortcut. That's the same thing as you just hitting the blue R over here. This is going to render the exact same camera, everything. So let's hit R and do a new render. You'll notice I'm now getting an image of one light. Now, they are going to render a little faster because I'm obviously calculating just one light source, so that kind of helps. But we're just going to let this go for just a second, and we're going to probably stop right about now. That's good enough. Here's our not even close to being final image, but that's fine. Okay, so we're going to go over here and just kind of leave that. This is with everything. That's one light. And I'm just going to repeat this just for a second with each one. So we're going to hit H to hide it, go to the next one, hit H to unhide it, come over here. We're going to hit R, or again, you can just hit that R over there. We're going to do the second light, and just I'm going to let this go through a few passes of samples, and then we're going to keep going on to the next one. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this as I'm going through it. It should be pretty straightforward, and I think you guys probably understand what I'm doing, even though it's a little clunky. Okay, so there's 2. I'm just hitting escape or hitting that cancel button, so we're good. Come back here, H, hit H on that. All right, let's do it again. Okay, here's my backlight. This one's really grainy, so I have a lot of bounced light from this one, and so potentially this one could look a little noisy in Nuke if I end up using it for the final. Yeah, Luke, you've had an interesting situation because you've got about 20 lights in your project you're going to be picking from. Obviously, I'm not expecting you guys, just because you did, some of you guys have like a dozen lights, don't feel like you actually have to use every single light source. I'm not, grading it that way. As long as you guys have like at least 2 or 3 lights that are going into Nuke, even if it's not exactly from the same bonus render, that's still okay with me. Okay, there's one. Hide, unhide that one. Let's do it again. This one's a lot brighter, so that one's going to be a pretty interesting one. So here's this one by itself. Really like this guy. we're almost there. All right, that should be good. And we're down to one left. But probably when you guys do it, since you're going to wait for the final renders, I would anticipate maybe if you have like 5 of these, like it might take 30, 40 minutes for you to finish it. It's not going to be too bad. All right, so here's our final one for the top light. Ooh, so creepy. Kind of digging that one too. And on kind of curious for everybody that's watching this stream on my end on YouTube, it looks like my video output is absolutely horrendous. I'm curious if you guys are getting a decent stream or if it's pretty pixelated for you. Because sometimes when I look at this thing on YouTube, it looks like it's terrible, but it's actually fine for when you're viewing it. All right, cool. So I got all my lights. So I can just kind of click through these. We got the render with everything. I've got each light separately. Yeah, I think it's my connection at work that's not being too pleasant at the moment. But they're all separate lights. All right, so we are going to, yeah, and well, you don't need to brag, David. Mine's fine, and I'm running HD. We're going to save all these guys out independently and check how they look. So I'm just going to make a folder on my desktop for all this stuff, a little dumping spot for it. So we'll call this Nuke Fun, and let's save all these guys out. So we'll start with the first one. By the way, you don't need your with your image with all the lighting. I just want you to kind of see where we're starting. We only really need these guys right here, each light separately. So we're just going to click on one. Now remember, before we save it, what's that thing that I talked about a lot in the videos? We want to do burn and mapping on saves. So up to catalog, make sure burn and mapping on saves turned on. Everyone actually did a pretty good job with this, so that's I'm sure you guys are going to be fine. But we're going to click on our first image, file, export file. You'll see there's a hotkey for it as well, and we're going to just drop that stuff in here. So the format's going to be PNG. We're not going to do EXR or anything like that. So we're going to call this light 1. PNG. We're just going to save all these out the exact same way. So we're going to click on that, light 2. Three. And again, you guys don't need to do this many. I'm just doing it because I have that many lights. So why not? Light 4. And number 5. Cool, we got all the images saved. Let's go over here to double check. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, they all work. They're all slightly different. Nothing too fancy here. Front shot, but this should work pretty well. All right, so why did we do all this? Well, we're doing it because it's a really cool way to talk about some different things we can do in post-production. So the main idea is when you're rendering something like this, occasionally you want to have the ability to tweak a few things after it's already been rendered. Because I'm sure, as you guys know, rendering takes a while. You've all learned that over the last couple of weeks. It's not a quick process. And if you have an art director that says, I want to reduce the intensity on a light, or I want to maybe a highlight on something is a little too red. He wants to change the color of something. Maybe it's the metal's color is a little off from what they were hoping for, or there's like a texture in the background that you did, and this wall texture is just really bright and it stands out, and so they want to darken that down so the focus turns to maybe the character in the foreground. But you want to do that after it's been rendered, because every single time you make an adjustment, if you have to re-render it, just think about how many iterations you're potentially going through and how much time you're spending just re-rendering an image. And keep in mind too, you guys are only rendering one image. This is one frame. And remember that with animated shorts, movies, television, these are a sequence of images, hundreds, thousands of frames, tens of thousands of frames. I mean, this stuff takes a long time. And so if you're re-rendering, a 1,000 frame shot, even if it's going to a render farm, you're really delaying the process from completing something because you're spending so much time, redoing all this information. So that's why we're going into Nuke. We're going to try to fix some of this stuff without re-rendering it. The magic of post-production. Now I'm going to open up Nuke. Now down here I have it, bookmark on my taskbar. I'm using Nuke 11.2. I think you guys might actually be in a different version than me right now. I think I'm one version back. You guys might be in 11.3. If you guys could tell me which version you're currently on, that'd be very helpful. But I'm on 11.2. It doesn't really matter, honestly, what version you're in, as long as Nuke opens. The things we're doing in Nuke are very basic. It hasn't changed in a long time, so even if you are one version back, one ahead, you're good. It's all going to be fine. So we're inside of Nuke, and by a show of hands, meaning I can't see anyone actually raising their hand, but how many of you guys have actually used Nuke before? Does anyone in this group have any experience using Nuke? Aside from opening the software to verify it works. So you're all, yeah, 12.0 v3, that's going to be fine if you're using that one. Now, if you haven't used Nuke before, a lot of you might be more familiar with Photoshop, because of course that's a pretty popular software. You guys probably had classes about Photoshop previously in high school. We all know kind of how Photoshop works. It's layer based. This is going to be quite a change for you guys, because this is very, very different than Photoshop. This is node based editing, not layer based. So the big difference here is with Photoshop, with layers, images will stack on top of each other. It's kind of like having a bunch of cards and you layer the cards on top of each other in a stack. You only see the top card in the deck. That's basically how Photoshop works. Nuke doesn't do that. Nuke, you can have things in any order. You can combine things in random orders. It's not really stacking things vertically. You just have a bunch of images collectively together in a pool, and then you get to decide how you want them to merge together into one final shot. Now, what I'm going to do is go to my desktop, and I've got Nuke open. I just went to full screen. That's pretty much it. And we're going to go to the folder, and I'm going to take all my images. Actually, so if you guys have done any node editing, whether it's in Unreal or Maya, so Maya does have node editing as well. We will be doing that, by the way. That's going to be in your second shading and lighting class. We will be node editing in the Hypershade or the node editor. They're very similar. Unreal has it. It's the same concept, though. So we're going to take all these images. I'm just going to drag over them, and we're just going to drag them down into this area here in Nuke. This is called the node graph. And we're just going to click and release, and we can just minimize out of this. And you can see Nuke has brought in all the images. So real quick, let's just kind of cover some of the basic, the layout of Nuke, what we're looking at, and how do we move around in here. Okay, so the area down here at the bottom, this is the node graph. And you'll see the node graph has a few different parts to it. Curve editor, this would be if we're doing animation. We're not doing that today, but in another class we'll probably cover this. Dope sheet, which is kind of related to the curve editor. It's just us moving things around through the time, but because we're not doing an animated sequence, these guys don't really matter. Now what I'm going to do is just click with my left mouse button and just move things around. I'm going to put them in the order they're numbered. 3, there's 4, there's 5. So I have them all sequentially just laid out next to each other. Now, how do I move around inside of here? Because we all know softwares have hotkeys. Mine's got this little alt, left, middle, right mouse button. Nuke's the same way. There's different navigation controls. So if you do alt left is our pan or translate around the node graph. So this is alt left. Alt right does the same thing. You can use alt left. Oh, that's weird. It was my stream just died for a second. Alt right is going to do the same thing, left and right. Alt middle does back and forth. I tend to just use the middle mouse wheel if I want to scroll back and forth. So usually when I'm moving around in Nuke, I'm using alt left to do this, and then I middle mouse wheel back and forth this way. Now remember before in Maya where I've showed you guys, sometimes the camera gets a little bit weird, and sometimes you want to just select something and hit a button to zoom into that object. That works here as well. If you sometimes you'll lose track of something. If you happen to hit F, it will sort of refocus your node graph, I guess we'll call it the camera, back onto your nodes that you're using. So F will still snap back to where you're doing all your stuff. Pretty simple. So there's our node graph. Very, very straightforward. Now, on the right, we have our properties area. This is also similar to something inside of Maya, but there's a big difference here. I want you to see how this works in Maya and how this is different than Nuke. If I click on a head in Maya, you know how in the channel box and the attribute editor, you guys have seen this stuff like immediately update? Like you click on something, you see the settings for it, right? When you guys change a light, you click on a light, you can see the light in the attribute editor. It just shows up. This is not how Nuke works, and there is a reason for that. When you click on something in Nuke, whoops, see how I accidentally double clicked? Let me just get rid of that again because that really ruined my lecture. Normally when you click on something with a single click, it doesn't show up. Okay, it's not here. And I'm just clicking on all these and I don't see any settings. Because in Nuke, when you select something, you actually don't want that to constantly show you the settings. You want to be able to click on other things and modify different parts of the script. So what you're selecting and what you're working on are not always going to be the same thing. So if I want to see the attributes or the properties for something, we want to double click, meaning double click, it loads. This is called read 3. Read 3 just means this is the third image I've brought in. See how the read numbers don't really line up with the image numbers? So it doesn't matter. It's still all fine. It just happens to be the order that I loaded them into Nuke. For some reason, it brought them in out of order. But you want to double click. Now you can rename these. So if I double click at the top, you can see read 3. I could call this light 1 or light 5 actually, because that's the way it's named on the image. So I might go through here real quick. We're going to double click light 4. Double click. I'm just going to name everything. Light 3. Double click light 2. I'm going to hold Alt left click to move over a little bit. Double click. Go up here. Light 1. I think you guys kind of get the idea. So I'm just renaming them so it all matches. And one of the immediate problems you're noticing is on the right side, look what's happening. All this is building up. So see how every time I double click on something, it's adding another node to the properties over here? This can be very confusing for a new user because since they're all images, they all have the exact same settings, they look very similar, it's very easy to lose track of which one of these you're actually editing. So one thing I would recommend you do is let's reduce how many properties we can see at one time. Up here at the top, right below where it says properties, there's this little number 10. This defines how many different nodes Nuke will show you at once. So potentially you could see up to 10 different things over here at any given time. That is absolutely ridiculous. I've never had any project where I need to be viewing 10 things at once. What I typically set it to is 2, and I hit enter. Now, you can even set it to 1 if you want to do, if you think that's even better. And that's very similar to Maya. And the reason I'm doing 2 is because occasionally what you want to do is like compare and copy settings between 2 different things. Like if you're trying to get the same color, I can at least view 2 different nodes at once and say like, oh, here's the color here. I can just copy that to this one. That's kind of helpful, but I don't need to see 10. All right. Now, how do we start connecting stuff and view these images? Because notice when I click on them, and even when I double click on any of these, nothing is really showing up in here. This is our viewer. So the viewer has the same controls, Alt left, middle mouse, but I'm not seeing whatever we're clicking on. So there's something else in the node graph we haven't talked about yet. So let's just back up. Down here, you'll notice, hey, there's something already hanging out in the node graph. This was here before we brought in anything. This always starts off in your new Nuke script. It's called Viewer 1. Viewer 1, and if you look up here, this is also called Viewer 1. It's almost like they might be the same thing. So the way Nuke works is you need to connect something into the viewer in order for it to display up here. Okay. Now, how do I do that? There's 2 ways to connect things together. I'm going to show you the slow way, and then we're going to show you the better way to do it. Nuke has all these little arrows you can see you can pull out from the bottom, and you can start connecting things together. This is how node editing works. Now notice on the viewer, there's also an arrow sticking out that you can connect up to something. So regardless if I go this way or this way, it'll connect. So let's just drag it down first this way. And notice how as soon as I do that, it shows up. Okay, so there's my image. And it's obviously not fit very well to this particular viewer, but there it is. And I could do that again. I could bring this down, right? And I'm going to drag all these down. Now, I want you to notice what's happening here in the viewer as I do that. When I bring them down here, see how they're all getting different numbers? I'm dragging everything into the viewer, but I'm not seeing everything. So I'm only seeing the first one. So the numbers are dictating which one of the inputs you're currently looking at. At the moment, we're looking at 1. If I want to see another one, there's a reason why it's showing you numbers, because the numbers are how you actually change and view things. So if I do 2, 3, 4, I'm hitting the numbers on my keyboard, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on my keyboard, you'll notice I can now flip between all my images very quickly. Okay, now let's just disconnect everything. I'm going to click on the arrows and just kind of drag them up to break the little connection. So none of them are connected. They're all broke, right? What I want you guys to get in the habit of doing with the viewer is instead of you painfully connecting stuff to this all the time, because this thing could be in a bigger script, who knows where the viewer is actually located. It could be out in the middle of nowhere and you're working in a different spot. So you don't always want to be looking for this to view something. Just remember that the numbers will allow you to view stuff. If you click on the image and hit the number 1, that puts it in the viewer automatically as the first input. And so if I click on anything and hit 1, it'll keep replacing it. 1, 1, 1, 1. So see how when I use the 1 key on any of these guys, that is me quickly slapping that guy in the viewer. So if you don't want to worry about having multiple images in the viewer at once, just use the 1 key. Keep replacing your 1 key with whatever you want to look at. So I'm using 1 on everything. If you like using 1 and 2 to compare, you can do 1, 2, and then if I hit 1 and 2 again, it flips back and forth between the two things we just did. And I can disconnect just by dragging the arrows out and break the connection. Okay, does everyone feel okay so far as like double clicking, seeing the properties, connecting stuff to the viewer, using the arrows? You guys are probably just going to use the 1 and 2 keys. I don't think anyone's really going to be looking and trying to connect stuff into the viewer with the arrow, but you can do it if you want. Not too bad so far, okay? Now, here's where we start getting into some actual node editing. We need to start combining stuff together. That's our goal here. How do we combine images together? So we have to make a new node. We just don't want to end here. This is a very boring lecture. Okay, there's a couple ways to make nodes in Nuke. On the left side over here, you'll see there's all these buttons. Let's click. These are all nodes we can make. There's a bunch of really cool icons. There's the read node. Now we've seen this before. Read node is what these were when we first started. A read node is basically you loading in some type of image or an image sequence, a video. It's us bringing something into Nuke. We have a write node, read and write. Write is going to be us saving something out of Nuke. So eventually we will be using the write node to save the final image. We're writing it to a separate file. And there's a bunch of other ones in here, some procedurals like checkerboards and constants. And if you go through these menus, you're going to see there's a bunch of stuff that we're not going to worry about. Glints, lens flares. Some of these are pretty fun. If you ever want to Michael Bay the hell out of your image, we can go in here and add glints and lens flares to everything at the end, just because it's kind of funny. We're going to make the next Transformers movie. Got a bunch of other things down here for different filters, time adjustments. Here's adjusting channels, like flipping red and blue channels, adding an alpha channel, combining channels from different images together. It just keeps going and going. Math nodes, super exciting. We all want to do some math nodes, color correction. So there's a lot in here, right? It just goes and goes and goes. But this is how it's all organized. You're more than welcome to go through here if you guys are just want to kind of play around with this stuff and just see what this even is. And they have really good documentation, so you can kind of read what all these different things do. There's a couple better ways, though, to create this stuff, which I kind of prefer. I don't like going through the buttons because this is kind of like in Maya, where you sort of start going through all these menus to find stuff constantly. You're like, all right, where's that tool? It's up here and it's over here. It's a very slow process when you're having to navigate through all these menus just to find something. So one of the things we always try to do is when we get comfortable with the software, we want to get into shortcuts, hotkeys, quicker ways to access the tool that we're using over and over again, because we're trying to make ourselves more efficient. Okay, actually, let's close out of mine. I don't think I need to do anything in here anyway. Anytime Maya. There we go. So instead of us going over here, we are going to right click in the node graph. And you'll notice when I right click, look what pops up. These, starting here, are all the same things we were seeing up in the top left side of Nuke. It's the same nodes, but look how much faster it is to go into here and pick something as opposed to you dragging all the way over here and then finding what it is through these little menus up in the top. And even better is there's a search function. So if you know that you need to make something called a merge node, and it's actually something we have to do. We have to make a merge node. So a merge node, if I right click, I could look through it through here and eventually find, okay, there's merge, there's the merge node, but you can also type it in. So if I hit tab, tab is a search box, and I can start typing something into it, like I want to do a merge node. And you can see it filters things out based on name. There's the regular merge. Go down, hit enter, boom, merge node, right? That's the same thing as me going in here and finding it this way and doing it like that. Merge. Okay, so we're going to make a merge node. So I'll just do it the tab way, merge, or merf, apparently, merge. We're going to create it. I can move it around. You can decide how you want to organize stuff. Now, the way you want to typically get your things organized within Nuke is I like to think of Nuke buildings. It's sort of like you're building a script, sort of like an upside down Christmas tree. So you typically start with a lot of inputs in your comp, and you eventually start whittling your way down where you've combined enough things together where you're going to end with some singular final video or a single image at the end of your comp. So it all combines into a kind of a tree that's flipped upside down until there's one final result. Now, what the merge node does is it's very similar to Photoshop's layer blending. So you guys probably all know how when you layer things in Photoshop, remember how there's all those blend modes like multiply, overlay, screen, subtract, linear dodge, all that stuff. Those are blend modes. Now, if you double click on the merge node, and up here, if you look at the operation under the properties for it, you'll notice we have a lot of those same blend modes that we're seeing from Photoshop, like color burn, color dodge, min max, addition is plus. There's our multiply. There's overlay. That's a big one, right? So a lot of those ones from Photoshop are in here. So we can do some very similar things. Now, what we were trying to do with this is we're just really trying to add all these images together. So I want to put all the inputs into this thing. So I'm just going to break that from the viewer for a second. And we could drag arrows into the merge. Now, even though, let me actually back up. Now, normally, see how it says an A and B input? Typically, when you merge things together, it only thinks you need to do two images. Like, I want to layer this image over top this other image, like A over B. I want to add this image to another image, or combine them together with multiply. But you can actually put multiple inputs in here if you keep dragging stuff into the merge. So if I just grab all these arrows, it'll keep making new inputs, and it's combining them all together. Now, from here, we need to see, well, what does this even look like? I've merged, or I supposedly have merged things together. What does it do? Remember, how do I view something in Nuke? If I click on something and hit 1, I see it, right? So notice how I'm viewing the individual images. How do I see this? If I want to see the result of these sort of merging together, I click on the merge node and hit 1. So if you select this and hit 1, this is now showing you what it looks like when they're merged together. What does it look like? It looks like this guy, right? It looks like just this image on the side. Why am I not seeing anything else? They're there, but I don't see it in the merge. And this is where it comes down to just understanding what these are doing. And I'm not quizzing you on this. If you are bored, by the way, you can put your mouse over it. It'll tell you what they do. This is thrilling, I'm sure. Oh, geometric. 2 times AB divided by, A plus B, of course. You don't need to memorize what any of this stuff is. The things we're doing are very simple. We are going to be very simply adding images together. Currently, it's set to an over. What an over is it takes the first A input, or the highest number A input, which happens to be this guy, and it layers it over B. This is covering everything. If I change this merge to a plus, which is addition, watch what happens over here. Does that look familiar? It's this guy, right? We have this first image. Now, what was this image inside of Maya? This was the image I did before I broke up any of my lights. So what you're seeing is we've now combined all these lights together. It looks just like it did in Maya. It's exactly the same, and yours will even be better because there's not going to be any grain in it. And now, once I know that it works, we're ready to party, and we can start changing some of the lights and colors. So again, you just connect them all into a merge, put it to plus, you're good to go. But because we're trying to be quicker, there is actually a way to do this with one click of a button. This is going to hurt. If you select all the nodes and hit M, you're done. Ta-da! All that explanation for 5 minutes to tell you you could do it in about 2 seconds. And the reason it's a little faster is M is the hotkey for merge, and it just happens the way that Nuke works. If you have all of your nodes selected when you hit M, it automatically connects them to the node you're creating. Yeah, I every time I do that for someone, they're just like, "Come on, man! Did you really have to hold out on us like that?" So you can hit M with them all selected. It'll connect them all together. But you're seeing, though, there's multiple ways to do the same thing. It's how every software works. You guys get to pick the way you want to do it. Let's just make sure we put this back to a plus, and we'll click on it, hit 1. It looks like this. So you may be wondering why we did this, right? Because we had this image in Maya. At this moment, it doesn't seem like there's any reason why we'd go through all this work to end up with the same image. Here's why. What we're going to do is move this up a little bit. I'm going to zoom in to about there. And what we're going to do is move this down a little bit. I'm going to drop in some nodes underneath the images. So what would happen, like, you know how in Photoshop you guys have probably used like levels, hue saturation adjustments, curves, I don't know, contrast, as color correction nodes, right? You can change the color of things. We have that in spades in Nuke. So underneath each one of these guys, I'm going to drop an exposure node. So to do this, you can either off to the side, hit tab, type in exposure, and do it this way. Now notice how it's a separate node. I'm trying to get it to snap into here because I want to do an exposure under each of them. And if I click and drag this over a line, see what kind of lights up? Nuke wants you to connect it. It's waiting for it. It was built for this moment. So if you click and drag it over the line and just release, it will snap into place automatically, and you don't have to worry about disconnecting arrows. It's a fairly intuitive software. Now I can just start redoing that, right? We could do an exposure a different way. Right click, and I could do it through here. Color, there's the exposure in the menu. We could do it that way. Drag it over, snap. You can also click on an image, and because remember how before when I had it selected and I did M, how it automatically connected it together for me? If I have this selected and type in exposure this way, look what happens. Because this was selected and I made a node, it knows it's supposed to be connected automatically. So when you make nodes, it's aware of what you're selecting, and it will make and connect the node for you if you have something already selected properly. So again, over here, exposure, do it that way, it's already connected. And one final little trick here is if we know that we are, and I just hit delete, by the way, so clicked on it, hit backspace. If we know we're going to be using a lot of duplicate nodes, you can also duplicate things inside of Nuke. So if you click on something and do Alt-C, so it's not Control-D like Maya, it's Alt-C. Whoops, click on, there we go. Alt-C is your duplicate. It's sort of like a very quick copy paste command, Alt C. So, and just drag it over, snap into place, drag it over, snap, and do this. And I don't know if you guys can see, it's a little hard to show in the video. Can you see how it's trying to snap in a line right here? So Nuke has this node graph snapping turned on by default, so it's very easy to keep things organized. And one other kind of interesting thing too, if I hold down Control, see like when I hold Control down, all these little weird yellow dots are popping up. These are called dots. So check this out. Let's move back up and just pull this down a little bit. I'm gonna hold down Control. I'm gonna click on a yellow dot. That's a dot. A dot is a way for you to like redirect your arrows. If you have a really complicated graph, you can kind of like start moving things around, almost like you're doing circuitry and trying to like guide a node's output through some type of like script without having like arrows crisscrossing everywhere. So we're going to just click on those and delete them. If you guys want to make a bunch of nodes and make fun patterns, you're more than welcome to do that. Now, one thing I am going to do up here is we're going to combine these into a backdrop. So a backdrop is sort of like a visual group inside a Nuke. So let's make it off to the side so you can see it. I'm going to do tab, backdrop. Here's a backdrop. The way this works is you want to drag it sort of over here and click on the corner, and you want to expand it over your nodes, kind of like that. Once you've dragged the corner of the backdrop over everything, if you click on the top, see how you're moving it all together? So now they're grouped in one section. There's really no point to this other than you want to organize stuff in one area. But I could call the backdrop, let's rename it to image inputs. And I can color code it. There's some other options in here where I can be like, I want to make the backdrop color a little bit different. We're going to kind of go with a nice little dusty color right there. We can do different font. I can label it and even call it image inputs there. You can see it puts a little text. We can make this a bit bigger if we want. Italics. So it's a way to kind of label things for more complicated scripts. That way, again, these Nuke scripts can be pretty daunting. Like you're going to see some projects later on where there's like thousands of nodes in here, and it's a really nice way to keep your thoughts organized so you don't go insane. Okay, so we got our exposure nodes connected. It's all organized. Here's the magic. If I click on exposure 1 and I'm going to view it, I want you to look at, let me pull this down a little bit, look at the settings for the exposure node. I'm going to double click. Remember, you can't single click to see it. Double click. Here's exposure. The only thing you guys have to worry about is this little section right here where it says red, green, blue. That's it. I'm going to click and drag on any of these. Now, because I'm viewing the exposure, you can see it. Now, remember, if you're viewing the first image and you're working on exposure, it's going to look like it's not doing anything. It's because you're looking at the image before it got to the exposure. This is the original. You have to look at the exposure in order for you to see what it's doing. So I'm just hitting 1 on the right node. I'm viewing it. I've double clicked. I'm editing it. I can move it around. You can see clearly this is working. Okay. Now I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And it works the same way for all these guys. If I want to see this one, click 1. Double click, so I'm seeing exposure 2, and this one also works. It's making everything brighter and darker, okay? Now, I'm going to see these collectively, what they can do. So I'm going to click down here and hit plus. So here's the result, and what I can do now is start going through these and controlling how bright I want each light to be. Now, currently there's a lot of lighting information here, and I think it's too much. So we can start going to these and playing around with which light we want to have our main light source as. So maybe we want this guy, the one on the top, to be the main one. I'm going to boost this up. I'm double clicking so I can see it. I'm going to crank this guy up a little bit. Double click on the exposure 4. Let's bring this one down. Okay, double click on 3. It's a rim light. We're going to crank that guy up. Oh, that looks fantastic in the background. So we go. There's no grain at all with this one. Here's 2. I can kind of see how I'm like basically controlling which light I want to see. Let's actually take 3 down because that does look really bad. We're going to bring this to the point where I can't really see it. I'm not too crazy about that one. 2, we're going to, let's actually have this one kind of faint. We'll maybe do something around there. And 1, maybe I'll have this one be a little bit more dominant on the left side. Let me take that top one down a little bit because that's pretty bright on the top. Okay. So all I'm really doing now is changing intensity, but I want you to see kind of the difference here. I'm going to drag through my exposures because I'm still viewing the results. This is just making them brighter and darker, but I want to turn these off because I want you to see the change. So I'm going to select all the exposure nodes. I'm going to hit D. So D is a shortcut for disable. Before, after. So you can see that we're getting a completely different look. We're not moving lights, we're just changing the intensity of each light separately, and we're creating just a different final image, but without us doing this in Maya and then re-rendering it. This is all happening almost instantly inside of Nuke. It's pretty cool. And it gets even better. Yeah, so if you drop a keyframe on something, it will hold that value infinitely until you set a second keyframe. One keyframe just means it's a static value through the entire timeline. It's like sort of it's called a like an infinite, like a post loop. But if you put another keyframe, you can change it to another number and you can animate it, which actually you could do, which I'll show you in a second. But we're going to kind of start with this, and I'm going to change some of the colors up just a little bit because all we're doing is changing intensity. If you look at these exposure nodes, though, they all have the ability to change RGB values. But for some reason, when I move it, see how they're all going together? So exposure is the same thing as intensity, where if they're all moving together, you're just making it brighter or darker. This checkbox right here called gang, and I assume it's just this is the Foundry having a sense of humor. The gang checkbox means all the sliders move together like a gang, I think. I don't really know. I think that's just why they're calling it that. If you uncheck gang, they're no longer part of the gang and you can move them independently. So I can now say the red channel is brighter. I can say the green is less intense and see how the color is changing. So you have to kind of think about what colors combine together to get you the one you want. Like purple is a combination of red and blue. So that's why it looks like that. Yellow is red and green. So if I push these up and push the red a little bit farther, I can get yellow. So you can now move each color around and come up with something completely unique if you wanted to. So we might pull this back and maybe I'm going to do like a really faint, let's do something kind of like this. And with our main light from above, maybe this one should be different. We're going to uncheck gang, and I can start playing around with my main light source being a completely different color if I wanted to. So maybe we'll do something like that right there. Okay, so now we're changing the color. You can do this for any light in this shot. You can do the underlight. This one can be changed if I wanted to. We could make this really creepy green. So I could take this guy, uncheck gang, boost the green up, and now I get this really like kind of eerie undertone right there. I don't want to overload the shot with too much information, so you want to be kind of careful. If you get to the point where you have like a color that you like, but it's too bright, if you turn gang back on, see how they all move together again? So when gang's on, you're changing intensity. When it's off, you are changing color. And kind of related to the keyframing thing that Luke's talking about, you can animate and keyframe these. So if I was doing a shot where I wanted like a flickering light bulb, but let's say this was like a weird, we're doing some type of like a witch's brew or something. It's like a potion, like a bubbling cauldron beneath the character, and I want to have it like the intensity changing over time. You actually can keyframe these, so this will kind of like flicker and pulse, and you can do all the animation in Nuke instead of like trying to animate the light's intensity inside of Maya. You can put random expressions on stuff in Nuke to pretty much automate all this for you. Okay, so we'll kind of leave it down like that for right now, but I think you guys kind of get the idea. All right, do you guys have any questions about any of that so far? I know it's a lot. But we brought our images in, we're just connecting them together, organizing it, putting exposure nodes on it. And the whole time I'm working on the exposure nodes, I'm viewing the plus, excuse me, down here. I'm looking at what they're doing when they're merged together, because that will help me figure out what I want to do with these lights. And you guys will probably want to do a couple versions of this because I know you're going to want to experiment. You're more than welcome to take this. You can click on the whole backdrop and do Alt-C, which is, remember, duplicate. That's our copy. I could make another version of this over here, play around with different settings, and make a new, merge them together and look at a different version that's combining to do a different color palette. So feel free to make multiple types of this render if you're having fun and you just want to see what you can do. All right. And the last thing we're going to do is a vignette. And I actually have to double check my documentation because I'm not even sure, honestly, if I still have the vignette in there. I'm going to do it and show it to you anyway because it's not that difficult. But you may not have to do this. I just have to look at my docs and figure out if I still kept it. I've changed this project so many times now, I've lost track. When you're done, we're just going to do a really simple gradient to make the center brighter. We're going to fade it to a little bit of a darker value on the edge. Yes. Yep. So the question is, will M connect into the merge? Absolutely right. So if you had this with Alt-C, if I had a duplicate, if I want to make that merge, we click on the bottom row of exposure nodes, M for merge, and you can see they snap together. And the only thing I would have to do is change the merge operator to plus. And if I click on it and hit 1 to view it, I'm now looking at the new one. But yes, M will connect whatever you have selected together. Okay, so we'll just disconnect that for a second. We'll leave this off to the side. All right, so we're going to jump in here and look at this guy. I have my new light set up. I don't know if it looks good. It's a little bit, it's a lot of color, I guess, but it's what we're doing. Now I want to put the vignette on here. Now in Nuke, unless I've added it and I just didn't know about it. Nope, of course not. There is not a vignette. I do want to show you what a vignette looks like. Probably most of you guys already know what this is, but this is a vignette. It's this stuff. It just, you've seen it in photos a lot where it kind of fades to a darker color on the edge. It's a really simple thing we can do to focus towards the center. It's really just a gradient. Typically they're a radial gradient, but sometimes you'll get some ones that are a little more rectangular or kind of a oblong kind of shape. But they're very easy to do. So in Nuke, to do this, takes a couple steps. The first thing I want to do is, since I know a vignette darkens to the edge, I want to think okay, what could I do to darken the image at all? Well, we actually know how to darken an image because we've been doing that, right? These all darken the image. They were doing it per render, but it still works. So I'm now going to click on the merge. We're going to hit Tab. I'm going to make an exposure node under the merge. Okay, let's move that up a little bit, and we'll keep this right here. So this exposure, if I view it in here, we'll maybe rename this. We'll call it exposure vignette. If I drop the red channel down, you can see that this is changing the intensity of the whole image, right? Because it's affecting everything after it's been merged. You can sort of see how these things begin to combine together, and depending on where you're editing something, it controls what part of the image you're actually working on. So that's everything. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken it, but remember the issue right now is even if I darken this down quite a bit, this is not a vignette. This is me darkening the whole image. What I'm trying to do is get, well, I closed out of it, I guess. I'm trying to get that radial effect where it darkens to the outside. So I need to do a couple extra steps here to make sure this vignette, this exposure adjustment, is affecting the image more on the edge. So I'm going to hit Tab. I'm going to create what's called a radial draw. Now this is a radial node. Radial nodes are under the draw menu. All of these nodes have one very important thing that we have to remember. Draw nodes are sort of, this is what it looks like, by the way. These are nodes that are, you're almost like making a new image in Nuke. I'm making a gradient in Nuke. Now there's one big thing I want you to watch when I click between this and the image. Look, see this little kind of weird bounding box around it? where it says 2K Super 35, look at our render and then look at this. Here's our image, 720 by 1080. Here's the radial. Now, I know you're not sure exactly what's happening, but if I go back and forth with 1 and 2, we can all agree that it feels like the whole thing's popping, right? It doesn't feel like these are lining up very well. Like this is kind of like a little wider than it should be. This is a taller image. So when you make a draw node, regardless if it is a radial, a rotopaint or rotoscope, that's a whole other topic, rectangle, any of this text, you have to tell Nuke what resolution this new image is supposed to be. And I typically want to keep all my image resolutions the same, so it's very easy to combine things together. So this is the wrong size. So let's delete the radial real quick. What you want to do, and you can do this early on in the project if you want, is we need to quickly go into Nuke's project settings to define the resolution we're currently working at. I'm going to hit S. S for settings. I think it's up here as well. Yep, right there. Project settings. Now, when you do it, it's going to pop up in the properties. Here's your project settings. Now, what you're going to notice is almost right off the bat, you can see the problem. Look what's right here. Full size format. There's that thing we just saw earlier on the radial. 2K Super 35, which is a 2048 by 1556. This is clearly not what we wanted, right? We're going to hit the drop down. Whoop, let me try that again. And the one we're doing is a 720 by 1080. Now, this is not one of the presets that come with Nuke. However, look what's down here. It is listed here because even if your images aren't part of one of Nuke's default resolutions, it will show up in the list at the bottom because it's in your script. It's here. We're gonna hit that button. See how it changes? Now watch what happens as soon as I change that. The next time I make a radial, let's look what it does. Tab, radial. I'm gonna click on it and hit 1. See how it, like now if I go back and forth, I know it's not like perfect, like it's still very tiny, but see how like it's at least not popping? So it now understands the radial is the correct size. It's pulling the width and height information from my project settings. So that just kind of alleviates any issue of us trying to line things up. Now the next thing is let's connect this into the exposure because I want this to control where this vignette is affecting it. Now there's a little trick here. If you look on the right side of the node, and you might have noticed this up here, I don't know if you guys saw there's a weird little like an arrow sticking out. See how when I pull this out it says mask? I bet some of you, well not that one, some of you may know what mask is because masking is in a lot of different softwares. Masking is essentially your alpha. It's an alpha channel. It controls where you see some effect. So if I drag this out to the radial and let it snap into place, the radial is going into the mask input of the vignette. And you saw how as soon as I did that, how the whole image changed. Now it's not correct, but there's something very good happening. You'll see that it is doing something in the center. So how do I turn this off? Because I want you to see how it's changing. We click on the exposure. I'm going to hit D. So D is disable. I'm just disabling it and re-enabling it. You can see that the radial is now telling the vignette or the exposure to darken in the center. But what is it supposed to do? Oh, my stream just died for a second again. That's weird. But what is it supposed to do? It needs to do the opposite, right? It has to darken on the outside. So it's inverting what it should be doing currently. The reason for that is because if you look at the radial, it's white in the middle. The way masks work is white is where it's going to affect something. Black is where it doesn't affect something. So this is where we're getting our darkening issue right here. So the good thing is if you double click on the exposure node, if you just look at the settings, you'll notice there's a little area down here, like below where I was sliding this guy, where it says mask. This is where it's pulling the radial information from this input's alpha channel. But if you keep going to the right, look what pops up. There's an invert. I can invert the mask. We're going to hit it and see how when I flip it, it's kind of inverting the effect of what that radial's doing. So it's kind of the same thing where if I had dropped an invert node under here and flipped it so it was black going to white, That's basically what we're doing with this guy. It's just a checkbox to quickly flip what the radial does. Now, what's our last issue? See how it's pretty much only affecting the center, and it really quickly fades. It doesn't really go to the edge of the frame. This almost looks like a flashlight effect right now. So if I really darken this down, it's very tiny, right? I want to have it go to the edge. If I look at the radial, the problem is because this doesn't go to the edge of the frame. I need to scale this up so the gradient goes to the edge, not die right in the middle. So this is a scale thing we need to do, just like in Photoshop. Photoshop, for anyone that that's used it, there's something called the free transform. You can just simply scale an image up. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're going to click on the radial. I'm going to use the shortcut T for transform. You can also use tab and type in transform. So what's happening here is the radial is going into a transform node, which is you just rotating or scaling this thing. The result of that transformed radial is now what's going into this guy. So what I can do is we're going to clean this up a little bit. I'm going to first over here, let's close out of the radial's properties on the right, because it was taking up a lot of space over here and it looked kind of weird. On the transform node, all I've got to do is take scale and scale it up. You can kind of see how that's affecting it. If you view the transform when you're moving it, you can see basically what it's doing. We're just making this bigger. And I'm going to scale it up until I see that go right to the edge. And usually like right around 3 just seems to be like the perfect spot where it just barely touches the edge of the frame. You don't want to overshoot it, because if you go too far, you don't really see the gradient anymore, and it's not going to really show up in the image. So 3 just seems to be that magic number that works. Oh, that's kind of fun. 3 is the magic number. If anyone knows what the hell I'm talking about, you get extra points. So now we've scaled it up. It goes to the edge. Let's look at the exposure node again. Okay, I'm going to just close out of the transform so I get rid of that little overlay right there. Here is now the new effect. I'm going to click and hit D. See how we're getting this little bit of a darkening effect to the edge? It's working. The center is the same, but it's fading towards the edge. Now, the last thing we're going to do, I know we're going over time a little bit, the last thing I'm going to do is make the main image brighter. Because one thing that kind of happens when you're doing the vignette is, yeah, you got it, it's Schoolhouse Rock, is it does darken the whole image, and in the process, you might just feel like the whole thing is a little dull, and you want to brighten things up. What I'll typically do in this situation is I like to drop another exposure node right before it, just to control the overall intensity before it gets here. So it's almost used to compensate for how much darker it's getting with the vignette. So I can still view the vignette down here, but on this one above it, I'm just going to really subtly boost this back up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So this is used to brighten it. This is used to darken the edge. Now collectively, if I turn both off, you can kind of see what these are doing together. So I'm going to select both, hit D. This is before and after. So it's subtle, but you can see how like it does sort of give you like that focused effect towards the middle. I know it took us a second to do this, but I mean, once you get more comfortable with Nuke, you're going to do this in about like a minute. It's not really that long of a process. There we go. Sweet. And we've done it. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. Let me change one thing here. I'm going to go back to this guy, and I'm not really feeling that color very much. And let's change that one. And I'm just going to fade this guy back. So I'm kind of playing around with my colors again a little bit. Is this a little too varied for me? I just want to see if I can settle into less rainbowy. Might even do that. There we go. So I've come up with some new like, okay, here's my new render again where I've modified colors. But you can see how easy this is, like, because it's all based in nodes. Nothing's really permanent. I was doing stuff down here with the vignette, and I'm still going back and changing each individual light just to play around with different ideas. So this is kind of why Nuke is such a cool software. It's a little bit of a learning curve because it's so much different than probably anything else you guys have done before. But I'm sure you can already see kind of the benefits of using this, even for something very simple like just basic, color adjustments per light. Um, you can now control everything a lot easier. And I think like David mentioned earlier, for muzzle flash, you could keyframe this for a sequence and potentially like one of these guys could be animated so I can kind of have the effect of like quick pops of light over a sequence. It's really cool. All right. And let's do the last thing here. We're almost done. We're basically going through the entire activity. Once you've got through and you're pretty happy with your adjustment, whatever you decide, we need to get this out of Nuke. And I actually need to save my script too. I've done a very poor job at not losing information. I haven't saved anything we've done. Bad, Jared. We're going to go up to File, and I'm going to do Save Comp As. Okay, just like you save your Maya file. This is essentially what we're doing. Save Comp As. I'm going to go to my Nuke Fun folder. Now, when you save it, this is you picking the directory. You can single click. This whole thing's a little weird to navigate through. There's documents. Here's your home folder. You don't need to double click. Just single click through stuff. But find your folder. You'll figure it out. Nuke Fun. Down here, you need to name it. We'll call this, I don't know, script 1. These are called Nuke scripts. So I'm just calling it script 1. Hit save. You can see it saved it. Now this is just saving all this stuff. This isn't me saving the image yet. For me to save the image, I have to sort of render it out of Nuke, just like you'd render an image with RenderMan. It's the same idea, but it's much faster because we don't have to recalculate everything. It's already basically done. Um, Now remember earlier when I was showing you guys all these nodes and I said read is how you bring stuff in and write is how you save stuff out of it, export, or render it. This is the node we need. It's the write node. But notice there's a hotkey called W. If you click on the last node in your script, hit W, it will automatically plop a write node. There's our final stop. This is the end of the rail, and then we can quickly save it out. So this is sort of that inverted Christmas tree thing I was telling you about. Multiple things starting at the top, they funnel together to combine into one line, and eventually we save out the result. So to save it is really easy. Just double click. You can look at the settings over here. This is where you want to save it. Hit the folder. I'm going to go to my desktop again. There's my Nuke folder. These are the images for Maya, but we're going to click down here and say final render. Save. Now, I want you to notice when I did this, so I didn't put a file extension on it. The one annoying part about Nuke, and I don't know if there's a reason for this, is when you pick the file type, it doesn't automatically put the file extension on the file. So like if you pick like PNG, maybe it's changed recently, I haven't noticed it. It doesn't put a .png on the name, and sometimes it won't open properly because your laptop won't understand what the image format it is. So the best way to kind of take care of this is if you haven't done the file type thing down there, when you're naming it, make sure you put the file extension at the end. Type in .png, hit enter. You'll notice when you do that, it automatically updates and Nuke knows what the file type is, but you have to type that in or it will not look right. Final render.png. Okay. Now to save it, I don't have to change anything else. It's already done. You come down here to render, hit the button. It says render the input. This is only one input, so yes. This is the frame range. It's only one frame. We don't need to do more frames unless you did animate something. So we're going to do frame 1 to 1. Hit OK. It's already done and the render's finished. So if I go to that folder and look at it, you can see there's all the separate images and there's my final. This is what I came up with from Nuke after modifying all the lights. So we've done it. This is your first comp. So important. All right. So that is pretty much what I wanted to go over with you guys. I have the documentation done. I don't think I linked the right documentation to the activity, so I'm gonna fix that as soon as I'm out of this lecture and get that updated for you. But what you're doing for 4.3, even though it's not up there quite yet for some reason, um, you are still doing this nuke stuff. You're doing everything I just did, and you're presenting that with a sort of a presentation with OBS. It's going to be posted on the forum. Um, there's a few things you're still going to do. I have a couple questions you can kind of optionally answer, like it's all, you don't have to do this, like it's your first time using Maya, what's your favorite thing you learned, blah blah blah. You don't need to really go that deep with all this stuff. That's just if you want to, like, if there's other things you think you want to talk about, you're more than welcome to kind of look through these and just kind of, write down your thoughts and before you say anything. But you're just presenting that, presenting your original character bonus image, your modified render from Nuke, and you're just going to talk about what you learned and then show off your work for week 4. That's pretty much it. And we're only talking like you doing like a 3 to 5 minute recording. It's not going to be nothing too intense. Um, and I have a link to the forum right here. I don't know if you guys have made an account yet. I think you guys did this before actually in maybe Can 101. So you may have already done a course reflection video before. But it's the same idea. You're just putting in a recording in there. If anybody has issues with OBS, just reach out to me. OBS has seemed to been giving people a lot of issues recently with black screens and it not recording. If you can find another recording software aside from OBS, you're more than welcome to use it. You can do a search online. You can use other free ones. I think Premiere can still record. I have Camtasia on my laptop. That's fine. So that's up to you. But that's it. Thank you guys for hanging out. I hope you all have enjoyed Shading and Lighting 1. Even though we're not technically done, but we're pretty much finished. And I'll have the link sent to you guys for the video tomorrow morning, like usual. And then I'm going to update the documentation tonight so that way it looks correct when you guys finally start the activity. All right, guys. Everybody have a good night.